In the meantime, I want to turn our attention to the United States. We're going to go live to Donald Trump shortly. In the meantime, here's James Morrow joins me. He's the host of the US Report and my colleague from Sky News. James, before we go to Donald Trump and hear him speaking ahead of the South Carolina primary, let's look at the recent elections that have taken place over the last few days. One in Long Island, one in Pennsylvania, one in Oklahoma. Different elections, some state. What's been your read as to the outcomes?
Okay, so some really interesting numbers have come through this week, in the last couple of days. We had in New York, remember George Santos, who is that bizarre Republican congressman with the whole history of lies and weirdness. He left the Congress, special election. Democrat wins that seat, so shrinking the Republican margin to even thinner numbers. Then in Pennsylvania, a House seat. Again, Democrats picked this up here in the Pennsylvania House. And then in Oklahoma, there was a whole series of elections, ballot measures and things like that. Democrats overperformed. I'm saying in here that I think the Republicans need to be very careful about getting overconfident and saying that, you know, Joe Biden is a busted flush, Democrats aren't going to go anywhere with this, and that Donald Trump is their guy, because I think that they have a tendency to get themselves too much into some of the weeds with weird fights around Taylor Swift and things like that, that don't necessarily make themselves look, you know, serious when they need to be talking about real, heavy-duty issues.
Yeah, indeed. A few other matters I want to ask you about. One, the head of the Intelligence Committee's called for some intelligence to be declassified relating to Russia. What are your thoughts on this story? It seems that quite a concern if Russia's seeking to put weapons in space.
Well, so this is really interesting. We all woke in the news here in Australia this morning that Mike Turner, who's the top Republican on the House Intelligence Committee, wanted information to be declassified so it can be shared with every member of Congress about what was called an emerging space-based threat. Now, my understanding is that this involves a Russian capability which has not been implemented or put into space yet, but a nuclear anti-satellite technology that would then, of course, be disruptive to defense and civilian capabilities if it was ever used. It's really interesting that it's coming now because, of course, we've seen all of these fights over funding for the Ukraine and their efforts to fight Russia back. It's obviously going to be shot through with politics, but I think this is one of those cases where people have to understand that whatever the politics of Ukraine are, and they're very complicated, you do have this other remaining issue that Russia itself remains a threat no matter where you stand on continuing to fund Ukraine and Zelensky's efforts against Russia.
James, we were both on air in the wake of the Biden train wreck of a media appearance inside the White House. There's been a lot of reaction to that, and then subsequently Donald Trump's own comments when he made reference to NATO allies and saying that if NATO allies don't pay up, Russia, go your hardest.
Well, you see, the interesting thing about those comments from Trump is he was referring to stuff he said some time ago. And what he was basically telling NATO was saying, you have got to pay up. You have got to pay your fair share. This is something, by the way, that U.S. presidents have been saying, probably since at least as far back as Reagan, that European allies needed to step up and increase their military funding. So what he said there, I think, was fairly mendaciously misreported by a lot of his opponents who tried to make it seem like he was hanging Europe out to dry. I don't think he was doing that. But, you know, it is one of those things where the noise in the media then creates those questions around Trump. And I feel like the thing that he needs to do is get out of his own way when Joe Biden is making so many mistakes. He's literally falling apart before our eyes. I mean, Kieran, we were on air. We talked about this last week, and he's not any better. And we're going to be talking about this tomorrow night and showing clips from 2016 and today, and you can judge for yourself. Trump is getting in his own way and getting in the way of everybody just focusing on Biden's problems, which is what he needs to do.
That's what he needs to do. And you had, I think, a salient reminder and warning to Republicans: don't get ahead of yourself. The same could be said for Democrats. If they're complacent and they think that they're going to romp at home with the 81-year-old incumbent, I think they could be in for a rude shock themselves. James, great to see you as always, and we'll tune in for the US Report, 8 p.m. tomorrow night.